Tara Turner, and my title is Researching Métis Identity, My Métis Family Story. I'm now at the First Nations University in Saskatoon. I just started in August, so I'm a brand new professor, and certainly never considered myself ever to be a professor. I'm a high school dropout, have some pride around that, and went back to university, really thought probably I should have been an electrician, and probably I should have been. I would have made a lot more money, I'm sure. But found myself really enjoying the process of learning, and I've always loved books, and so kind of by accident in some ways it feels like I've ended up doing an undergraduate degree, and I did pretty well in it, and I quite liked it, and I liked psychology, and so I applied to graduate school and didn't have a clue, didn't go to an undergraduate institution that had a graduate degree, so it really feels quite miraculous that I stand before you here today. And I certainly was going to be a clinician, never an academic, and that was sort of firm all the way through my work. But as I went through this process, and really the research was a lot of that formative time for me, I discovered that I, one, really liked researching, and I liked reading, and I liked that experience. And two, that I was really committed to Métis issues and Métis health. And to try and find a job in Métis health as a clinical psychologist would be challenging, short of setting up private practice. And there's three really good examples why I didn't want to do private practice right off the hop, because I was busy. My youngest, Weston, is now 14 months old. So I do get a little bit of sleep, but still not tons. So this opportunity came. I worked at the MNS, the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, for a couple of years, doing the health director position there. And then when this opportunity came up at First Nations University, I decided to give it a go. So my job talk was probably my first sort of academic endeavor since my defense. And I was realizing this morning that I really haven't done a lot of revisiting of this information. I've just really started now again to be in the academic realm, and to have a chance to sort of get back and say, what is it that's important about this for me, and where do I want to go with it? So this is my family. When I'm the one in the yellow dress with the scowl, which didn't impress my mother at all. And my sister, I think, had fallen off our pony and broke her arm. And my brothers are apparently wearing the wrong vests, but the family picture, there it is. So that's the family I grew up with. And then there's me and my partner John at my PhD convocation, and then Alexander, Sebastian, and Weston. So that's really what I've been doing with my life most recently. Yeah, go ahead, thanks. So I grew up in this very small town on the side of a mountain in the middle of the Kootenays, with no real Métis community, not a lot of connection, but I had a mom that did a lot of genealogy. Her family had been Mormon, and there was a lot of presence of that and sort of the importance of genealogy. So she ended up doing this work and kind of discovering that the Turner side of the family was Métis. They weren't anything else that they might have imagined, and had evidence of that. But it was really confusing for me as to what did that mean. If I told anybody about it at school, they called you chief or something like that. So I kind of used words like part native. I didn't understand it in any kind of real way, other than whatever books I could get a hold of and things like that. So when I went to university and started reading about Métis people, and I ran into Maria Campbell's Half-Breed, of course, and really felt really inspired by that story, but also felt really separate from it, because that wasn't my experience at all. I didn't grow up in that community. I don't have those kind of connections. And so it was very connecting and disconnecting at the same time, because I thought, well, what does it mean to be me and be Métis, and why do I care about that, and is it important, and should I care about it? And my background is, it's really mixed in lots of ways. There's some of it's hard to track. In some books it says, there's some Inuit, Stoney, Cree, certainly on my grandparents, my great-grandparents. But it's difficult to sort of know what the mix is. There's French, Scottish, English, a bit of everything. So I had more of the understanding about kind of those places that my family had been, but again, it still didn't really sit well with me in terms of what it meant to me. I'm lucky, I guess, in some ways that I do have strong connections in the province through Philip Turner, who came here to Cumberland House, and then he went up through Isle of Cross, and he's really been sort of from Moose Factory to Lake Athabasca surveying. And most of the maps in Canada were really based on the work that he did here in Canada early on, and he taught David Thompson how to survey. I guess he fell and broke his leg, he must have been. And so one winter at Isle of Cross, he taught him how to survey, as well as Peter Fiddler. So it's good to have those sort of guides and those understandings through script and all of that. So I had the kind of proof, but again, it still didn't really resonate with me personally as to what this all meant. So these questions are ones I'm sure that you've all heard and will continue to hear. But I really started thinking about and hearing these more as a undergraduate and then as a graduate student at the U of S. As I sort of took a step away from clinical psychology and started exploring more in the realms of sort of Native mental health with the Society of Indian Psychologists in the States, and kind of connecting in more with people here in the province. And I was an IPHRC funded student, the Indigenous Peoples Health Research Centre, so through that system got to meet a lot more graduate students, got to meet other people in those circles, got to meet Maria Campbell, you know, those sorts of things. So it's pretty amazing. I mean, when you first meet her, it's a bit overwhelming, but she looks the same as she does on her original book. So this is my great grandmother and grandfather, and they eventually the family sort of settled around Fort Saskatchewan. They came through from Portage la Prairie out to Lake Victoria, to Fort Victoria, and then to Fort Saskatchewan. So I really like her because she's a horsewoman, and so am I. So, and she was apparently a great shot. She would be able to get a grouse off the top of haystacks, and I don't know whether it's a true story or not, but they said that she would shoot the lit tip of the cigarette out of her son's mouth. Now, I don't know if that's true, but if it is, she's pretty brave. Yeah, next one, please. Or her son was, yeah, exactly. So I never knew my grandparents, my father's parents, and that's really the Métis side for my family. They were killed in an accident when he was young. He was 8. That's my grandpa and some of the kids, and then my grandma over there at their place in Edmonton. So I didn't know them, and I never really had that connection with them. They were in a car, they were drinking, they had been driving, and there was 4 people in the car, and 2 people were killed, and the others were injured. And my grandmother was just about to have a baby as well, and the baby died that day too. And it was my Auntie Debbie's first birthday, the day of the accident, so they were kind of going back for a birthday party. And Debbie was the youngest living child at the time before this baby. And my great-grandparents had also died within about 6 months of that time. So they had already kind of had some pretty significant blows to their family. And then for them to be taken all at once was pretty challenging. So I grew up with some stories about my grandparents and about my great-grandparents and about what they were like, and about Kate and the horses, and my great-great-grandmother, Jane Whitford, and some of the stories about, you know, bearskin rugs and beaded gauntlet gloves and things, but they were just sort of whiffs of what might have been, or what the stories might have been. That I knew that my grandparents, my great-grandparents spoke Cree, but that they didn't identify as Métis or as First Nations or whatever. I'm sure others did identify them as that, but they would say they were French or various other things. So, and then my dad told me about being in the orphanage and in foster care, and what that was like for him. And I could see the impact of that experience on his life and his family, and the choices that they made with us as kids to sort of have a house that was in one place where we didn't leave, and fostering and adopting. Both my brothers are adopted, and helping with refugee families and things like that. You know, it really made an impact on him. And when I started to read about identity, I had no idea about identity or Métis identity or whether anybody talked about it or they didn't, and mostly they didn't in terms of psychology. But reading the stories and starting to think about it, and then getting a hold of a great dissertation by Dr. Kathy Richardson that talked about Métis family stories. And I read her dissertation and it's so good. I'm like, why? I can't now, basically. She said everything important about this subject. I'm just going to go off and cry in a corner. But eventually I kind of found my way through, and that, yeah, no, I did have something that I could go and work with. But she talks about how important those family stories are. And so I really wanted to be able to spend my time that I had to bring that together for my family, if not for the generation that was lost, but for the generations that are here and the ones that are to come now. But again, I really didn't see myself in the psychology literature. It just, there was a lot about kind of mixed race identity or cross-cultural identity in different areas, but it didn't resonate with me. The language didn't, the concepts didn't, the way I sort of was understanding my own kind of angst and uncertainty, just didn't see it there. So I ended up really going off to things like Maria Campbell's work, like Gregory Schofield, like April Raintree, all of those kind of key books, and sort of spending more time trying to understand it from that perspective. And it was a little bit scary because it's not a typical clinical psychology dissertation. And the further I went, the farther I wanted to go. So I was really lucky that my committee let me do what I wanted to do. So I got to spend quite a bit of time doing this. But I also really found how complicated identity is for lots of people, but for the Métis people in particular. So, and Kathy Richardson's dissertation was really important for me because I really thought, good, you know, like once I got over my fear of writing something that came even close, that she really gave me a lot of ammunition and a really lot of understanding. Like when I was reading it, I was just constantly saying, yes, absolutely, I understand that. Yes, I felt that too. And this idea of cultural spaces and having a space for the Métis, and this lack of a Métis place. There certainly wasn't a Métis space for me growing up in BC on the side of a mountain. And for lots of people, there isn't a Métis place. There is no this sort of Métis psychological homeland. So to build that a bit with my family, and that's my Uncle Bob, one of my interviewees and co-researchers. Yeah, please. So we know that there is, you know, kind of a legal or political definition of what Métis identity is. And this is what we have at the moment. And lots of smart people have tackled this in lots of different ways. And it's just tough. And I sort of see this, after all the work that I've done, I sort of see this as one aspect of Métis identity. This is the kind of the political definition that we have at the moment. And I think it's probably going to be in flux for quite a long time, and I don't think there's necessarily a right answer, but this is the one that we have at the moment. And that's my great-great-grandfather, Mason Brown. He built these boats at Athabasca, and he's buried there. So, yeah, that's a picture of them boat building. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. So as I kind of got into the idea of Métis research, really, there was an explosion in lots of ways, like since like 1999 with Linda Tehui-Smith and you know, Indigenous methodologies, and so there was getting to be much more that I could draw from in terms of sort of how do I go about doing this research. But the more I went, again, the farther I wanted to go, in saying, how do I do this in a way that makes sense for me as a Métis person, and how do I sort of even break out of the constraints of the ways of analysis and the ways of understanding. I mean, there's pressure to go. If you're talking about identity, you do macadam, or there's all these sort of set places that you can go for what does this look like to do your research and your analysis. But there wasn't really a lot of paths for kind of a Métis researcher to sort of say, how do I want to do this and do this with my family? So these are, you know, really important people to me, and how do I do this in a way that really resonates? So this is Amanda LaValle. She is doing her defense for her PhD in April, so she soon will be done. And she used this in her master's research, this idea of both Willie Ermine's ethical space and just the use of that. And I really, really resonated with me using the Métis symbol. I really like models. I don't know why. I think maybe because they're easy to explain and to understand. But I really felt like this sort of freed me up, the more I thought about it, to sort of do research the way that made sense to me. And that I could be kind of anywhere on that continuum and still be part of that Métis space, you know, that psychological homeland. So that's really was a starting point. Please. So what did I do? I went and traveled with my dad, and we went, I didn't have any kids then. We went across 3 provinces, and we went and visited each of my aunts and uncles. And first I did individual interviews with them. So we went around and just did all of these kind of gathering and spending time at the places. Like that old brick house was where my grandparents and the great-grandparents and a lot of my father's uncles had worked at that farm. And to get to go and meet the people there and spend time and have a cup of tea and just have some stories and wander around. And Frank, one of my father's uncles, had written his name on the wall, and just to kind of see the tools that they had used and the things that they had done and hear a bit more about them. And that's my dad on that machine gun. And when he was, I think that's what it is, or cannon. When he was young and ran away from the orphanage, he slept underneath that one night. And, you know, I'd always heard these stories, but to kind of go there and physically be there and do it with him was really special. And this picture of the house is the HBC clerk's quarters that my great-grandfather built in Fort Victoria in 1864, and it's still there. It's the oldest building in Alberta, still on its original foundation, I guess. So it was pretty cool to get to go and to go down to the river there where there's the river crossing and just, you know, spend some time and think about those people that had been there before us. And then after that, we did a talking circle. My oldest aunt was quite ill, and so we decided to just go ahead and do one that winter, because she wasn't very well. And my youngest uncle couldn't attend. But we did that interview, and we did a talking circle. And then my mom, amazingly, transcribed all of these interviews, of course, because she knew all of the people for free, which is great. And I distributed those to everybody. So even Uncle Brian, that wasn't able to be there, got a chance to sort of see and hear what other people had said in that circle. And then we got together again the next year where everybody attended. So it was a really powerful experience in lots of ways. I did a fast for the research with Maria. That was a big jump for me to go and do that, but it was important, and I'm glad I did it. And my dad did up an eagle feather for each of his brothers and sisters, and we took sashes and sweetgrass and sage and things like that I had gathered. So to get to sort of be free to do this in this way and to do the research with my family was pretty tremendous and resonating. What else? Okay, thanks. So this is the second talking circle that we had when everybody was there. So it's hard without a pointer here. That's my Uncle Bob on his knee there, and my Auntie Debbie, she was the one that was young, 1. And then Uncle Brian, he was 4 when the accident happened. My Auntie Judy at the front was 13, and my dad in the dark glasses there was 8. So we had our talkie circle at Auntie Judy's place and spent a day just going through this process of sharing stories. And setting it up as a talking circle was really great. And I was really lucky to have an elder that kind of helped me through that. And Judy had oxygen, and so we couldn't, have a lit smudge, and she showed me how to do that without lighting a smudge, and to just sort of create that space where people could talk, and we just went around and around and around on whatever needed to be said. I mean, I had some things that I wanted to ask them and some things that I wanted them to talk about, but really it was the first time that they'd ever come together and sat and talked about what had happened to them as a family. So it was really intense. And it was really challenging doing the write-up. I both audio recorded it and videotaped it. And I'd find myself having to get up and take breaks because it was just really painful, a lot of it, and because they're people that I care about and know and love. So, but it was also really important, I think, to be able to live with that and to do that in that way. And then Judy died in 2007. So we lost her voice out of the process. But I was really glad that we had kind of already done some of this work and been able to kind of connect as a family at that time, and then a few times after that, everybody kind of got together, and as Judy was ill. And my dad gave the eulogy at her funeral, and I included that in my dissertation. And her son, Richard, stepped in to sort of be the reader then for Judy, because everybody had the opportunity to be involved in all of the writing and reading and all of that stuff. And he said that it really was important to Judy, particularly to have Brian in her life, the youngest boy, the last couple of years of her life, that really was, really healing for her. So it was good, but it was tough to lose her as well. I think really through this process we were able to sort of create this, for my family at least, this sort of Métis psychological homeland where we could gather and talk and share and be who we were and share stories and have people's understandings of themselves. And if you didn't have to, most of the family don't identify really as Métis. It's always been Native or mixed Native or something like that. But to be able to just talk about what that has meant to them and how those connections have come together and how they have come together as a family. And the layers of ethics. I mean, I had university ethics, but also family ethics and spiritual ethics to contend. And so it was great, and it was really, it was challenging in some ways and really enriching. I think sometimes the hardest things are the best things, right? So, and we did a lot of this, just drinking coffee and talking and sharing and hanging out with kids and each other, and that was really a great time and part of it. And it was really a great process for me. I really felt like I got to do this research and help contribute to my family, but also be able to do this dissertation as well. When and how many times do you get to sort of spend that much time thinking about one subject? So there was definitely trauma, in the family. They had multiple losses. Their roots were really ripped out from underneath them. And there's lots of literature as to why that is important. I've lost my place, but that's okay. I think I must have missed a slide. They also lost an aunt that they were really close to too. So there was just a lot of losses right around that time. And I was really happy to get to spend the time talking about the baby that had died too, because we had never really talked about him. Everybody said that my grandmother was pregnant when she died, but hadn't really thought about or talked about that baby very much, and just the loss and not having him at the table. So we really sort of used the sweetgrass as kind of a representation of him being part of the circle. But it was intense for people. It was intense for me, and I felt really conflicted about kind of taking people to this depth. But really, I think the talking circle and all the work that we'd done before that really set it up so that we could go to this depth and also be able to come out and go for a walk and have a laugh and remain together as a family. So, and we also had a name for the baby because I guess I don't know whether they knew it was a boy or a girl. Maybe they just imagined it was a boy, but Auntie Judy told us that they had, picked out Vernon Daniel and that he had been buried with the mom, because we didn't know, I didn't know where the baby was either. So these are my dad and my Uncle Bob and my Uncle Brian and them as kids, and I really got to have a better sense of their family when it was together, that it was, not perfect but happy and they were loved, and that was really nice for me too, because sometimes it's easier to sort of feel that it's just all tragedy and trauma and whatever, but there was a lot of strength that went along with it. So when their parents died, my dad and his brother, Uncle Bob, went to their uncles. So there was a kind of a mixed family, and there's sort of the Turners, which were kind of known as the Breeds, and not that highly esteemed in some ways. And then there was the Adamsons, where they were a very well-to-do family, and then the dad was the magistrate, and I don't think they were quite that happy with this coming together of their children, but they did. But it was really the Turner family, the ones that could kind of least afford in some ways to take these kids in, that took in the kids. But Judy went to foster care and different family members for a little while, and Dad and Bob spent a year at their uncle and their aunts. But it was many kids in one room, and there was some family violence, and that eventually disintegrated, and they went off to foster care. And Judy was through a few foster homes, and then Dad as well, eventually with Bob. And Debbie, the baby, went to a family member from the Adamson side, and she was adopted out a year later, and nobody told any of the other kids that she was going to be adopted, so she just was gone. And when the 3 boys went to the orphanage, they were there for a few years, and then Brian, the youngest, was adopted, and again it was the same thing. He was just gone, so they weren't able to kind of have that connection or say goodbye, and so the trauma of that, to get to go through that as a family as well, and for him to hear how difficult that was for his siblings, because I think when you're little, you don't necessarily sort of understand and retain all of that. And then Harvey, the family they went to, he was dead I think 4 years later, and then the mom committed suicide a year after that, and their own kids were in care. So it just kind of continues in some ways. And I struggle to sort of understand the 60s scoop and whether my family was part of that or not, and maybe in some ways technically they're not First Nations, they were Métis. It was slightly pre-60s, like late 50s. But they certainly were separated from their family and from their culture. They were placed in non-Métis homes. They were adopted as singles, not as siblings. And they were adopted as white children. They weren't adopted as, Métis kids. And they certainly were known as that in the community. So it really, whether it fits or not, it really echoes and reflects, I think, that process. And I know now in the province, there's all these things happening, and there's legislative renewal process, and we have FSIN involved, and Métis Nation Saskatchewan, and the Ministry of Social Services, and FSIN has their framework, and we have the work that Cindy Blackstock and the First Nations Child Society is doing. So there's more about that, but often I don't hear much about the Métis kids, or what are the numbers of Métis kids in care, things like that. And I really think we need to kind of be able to suss that out and have a bit more clarity on that provincially and across Canada, and just so that this doesn't happen quite as much. So, yeah. Okay, thanks. They did eventually find each other, which is great, obviously, because we had this reunion at the end. So they found Uncle Brian first. The woman that ran the orphanage where they were gave my oldest aunt information about the family that adopted Brian, and Judy's take on it was that she did feel quite bad that this had happened, and that they had been separated and not been able to sort of say goodbye to each other. So she had that information, and then when my father was old enough, she told him about it, and he went to the home of Brian's parents while he was in school and kind of surprised them with him being there. And they asked that he just sort of stay away until Brian was finished school. But during that time, and he did that, but during that time they kind of kept him updated and would send him information and newspaper clippings of things. And so we at least sort of felt like he had a bit of contact. And then they did meet after. And as well, Debbie, they just, I think there was like some funeral plots to sell in Fort Saskatchewan, and the public trustee got in touch with my dad, and it ended up being his sister. So a bit more by chance, and it was a bit harder, but it did happen. So they did all come together in the end. So this is the first time they were together since they were kids, and that was in 1997. So it had been a long time. Like, they'd met up at different times but never together as a group. So this was the first time, and then when we came together for the dissertation was the second time. There's a lot around identity, and I think that being able to comb through the literature and sort of understand it was really important and helpful for me, that there's so many things involved in it. For me, looking the way I am, I didn't look Métis. Some of my family members do, some don't. And Debbie, certainly the youngest, is very white looking, and then some of my uncles and aunties darker, and sort of trying to figure out what does that mean and how does that reflect my identity, and how do I kind of navigate and understand this privilege of being light and Métis and being able to sort of speak up for those issues. And that's been tricky at different times in my life, and is less tricky now, thankfully, but understanding that people are still struggling with that. So identity encompasses a lot of things, I think. So in the end, this really is what I came back to as far as identity. I think it's the infinity symbol is a great model. And it just incorporates everything, right? It can be wherever you are at the moment is fine, and it's all part of being Métis. I think identity is pretty fluid for people. It can change, it does change. I'll see different writers identify different ways in different books. People learn more about themselves and then they identify a different way. And I just think it really speaks to the strengths, and to be able to sort of strategically place yourself wherever you need to be, and that all of those places are fine and valuable and understandable. And because I think partly for me, some of that sort of disconnection was not understanding how I fit in. I didn't necessarily fit into First Nation spaces, but I didn't really feel like I fit into Métis spaces either, or white spaces. And so then where am I? I'm kind of somewhere out in Never Never Land. And to sit around with people that grew up with their grandmothers and were speaking their language and all of that, it used to feel quite disconcerting to me. So to sort of come around to sort of, we know who we are, as Kathy Richardson would say, and we recognize each other and we find each other when we need to, and that's what it's about. It's not about sort of whether you fit a political definition or not, for me, or whether you meet the requirements of a Métis card in this province or another. It's about who you know yourself to be and who you know your family to be, and that's all good. I don't think we need, I think this fits. It certainly fits for me, and I think it fits for a lot of people. So it's simple and complicated at the same time. Sorry, yeah, go ahead. So what did I think in the end, really? That research is personal search. I was really fortunate to be able to be completely part of my dissertation. It was not the researcher, it was me. And some of it was hard to write and some of it was easy, and I did all of the academic parts of it as well, and I think that was really empowering and nice to be able to sort of go out on the limb and get out into the margins and back in the woodland and do whatever I wanted to do, and to see what came out of it, and to trust the process that it would work out. I don't know that students necessarily always get to do that, but I got to, and I was really grateful for it. And I love my dissertation. I love my family. So, I never got to that stage where I was kind of sick of it or tired of it or wished it would go away or just be over. And in my defense, I had my whole family there, and all of my, some of my participants and my friends, and there was drumming and smudging, and so I really got to sort of just say, this is me, this is the way I'm understanding myself at the moment, and this is what I want to do with it, and get to do that was pretty amazing. That suffering has some good parts that come out of it, It's not fun, and I don't necessarily recommend it, but it is a story about suffering, but there's lots of stories about suffering, both in our culture and others and around the world, and I think this really is something that, as people, we can kind of understand and relate to. And that there was a lot of strength. Sometimes just surviving is resistance and resilience, that it doesn't have to be everybody did this or that or the other thing. These were good, kind, caring people who had good lives and good families, and both of the kids that were adopted out went into families that loved them and cared about them and looked after them, and they did find each other in the end and spend the time together. And I got to hear lots of stories about my family, and that they were happy and loving and caring, and that they worked hard to kind of be a family. And just the importance of stories kept coming through, and I really hope that this is part of the process, is to kind of continue the story and not lose it this time in that sense. And I think it's strengthening. There's way more Indigenous graduate students and PhDs and people in all kinds of fields, and there's an explosion of choices for research and for sort of backup if you need that in your department to do things like this if you so choose. I get to be a professor, which is amazing, you know. So there's lots of those healthy stories, and they need to be told as well as the ones of suffering and pain. So, and I just love Thomas Kingley. So I liked his quote, and it really resonated for me as I was kind of going through my own family story. And hopefully it's not the end of the story. I'd really like to re-engage with my family again now that my kids are kind of getting a little bit older. I'm not quite as exhausted, and I have the time to dedicate a bit to making this into a book with their permission and collaboration, to be able to transform it into something that we can keep adding to and keep growing with, as you know, it resonates out to my cousins and their understanding of themselves, and my second cousins, and so on. So it's really a process rather than an end. This is my oldest guy, and I was talking with my friend Rose. She's First Nations, and Alexander was asking whether we are First Nations, and I said, no, we're Métis. And he said, oh, pirates. I said, pirates? Yes, exactly. He said, "Arr, Métis." I'm like, yes, we're pirates. So I guess I have a little bit of identity work to do at my own home. But I think that's fine. Métis pirates is great, especially in Saskatchewan, right? So yeah, so it's been really a great journey, and I've really enjoyed being able to do it. And I was thinking this morning that I haven't kind of gone through this since my defense, which was in 2010, because I've gone off and done other things and had these kids and things. So it's really amazing to get to come back and revisit it and spend more time with it, and to see it grow with my family. And it was really a decolonizing experience for me, I would say. Yeah, so that's it. That's all I got.